for that service. Now today we're going to have a different presentation than our usual solar-specific topics. The energy utility industry is a large, established institution that is currently faced with rapid change in solar, renewable energy, and smart grid technologies. And we have drawn an analogy between this situation and the United States military, which has had to adapt to external changes many times over its 250-year history. So General Halstead is going to provide her perspective on leading some of that change, and with the expectation that we can all apply some of these lessons to the solar industry. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to General Halstead, so you can begin.
Okay, thank you, Rick. I appreciate the introduction. And, you know, you're absolutely correct. There are so many parallels of leading in the military and leading in the civilian sector. And so my goal is to present some of those today to the audience. And so I look forward to spending the next hour with everyone. You know, clearly my favorite subject is leadership because it has to do with people really being the calm in chaos and bringing teams together. And across those 27 years, one thing I really realized was the difference between a good organization and a great organization. I really believe it was leadership. And so knowing that, I know it's very applicable to the civilian sector. So my real hope is that the listeners, as they listen to some of the points and some of the principles, that they begin to think about, you know, their own leadership style and maybe think differently about their leadership style and their own value system, et cetera, so that as they do that, that they will maybe improve themselves in order to better influence and better impact, you know, wherever they're living and working. So one of the things that we have in the military we call the VUCA environment. VUCA is a four-letter word you can use around your parents, and it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And you know, when I'm out speaking in the civilian sector, what I remind people is that they don't have to go all the way to Iraq or Afghanistan to find combat. And really, I call combat shift, and I say shift happens, and especially in a VUCA environment. And what happens so many times is the leader is focused on the shift instead of really focusing on how to respond to the shift. And there isn't an organization that doesn't have to struggle and navigate and lead through change. So when you're in a real volatile environment, things happen very rapidly and usually quite drastically without any time for preparation, or at least for minimal time for preparation. We always say the enemy gets the vote. And sometimes the enemy could be your competitor. Sometimes the enemy could be the environment, the economy. Oftentimes for us in combat, it's actually unpredicted weather that can literally wipe out a mission. And we also say in the military that, especially serving in Iraq or Afghanistan, that you sometimes can find yourself experiencing weeks of boredom, but then moments of chaos. And so how do you lead through those volatile situations? And then there's a great deal of uncertainty that leaders need to know how to navigate through. And I think the thing with uncertainty is that oftentimes previous solutions to recurring problems that used to work no longer work. And sometimes we're late to catch that. You know, so what worked yesterday, applied yesterday, may not apply today. And you really see this when you look at your facts and assumptions of an organization, of an operation. We saw this clearly when we went from Desert Storm to Operation Iraqi Freedom. We kept some of the same facts and assumptions, and that was really a poor mistake. You could say the same thing about, you know, the facts and assumptions of the terrorist attack on the towers in '93 versus the towers in 2001. What was a way to deal with it in '93 ended up to be the worst way to deal with it in 2001. So threats are inherent, yet very unpredictable. So understanding the environment around you during those times of uncertainty really requires the leaders to immerse themselves into the situation. And then, of course, there's complexity. I believe in analyzing things from a 360-degree perspective. You know, my 27 years in the military, I was a logistician. And so we were responsible in Iraq for distributing supplies, every class of supply, every form of supply across the battlefield. 20,000 people operating out of 55 different locations. And so it was a constant process to look at every operation from a 360-degree perspective and look at second and third order effects. What was the potential of a mission succeeding or not succeeding? What were the risks? And we had to be very careful not to compartmentalize our analysis and our assessment, because when you do that, you tend to leave important factors out. And there's a real sense of, well, that's the way we've always done it. It's very easy to default to that. And when we do default to those sort of things in our environment, then we ignore potentially the most powerful solutions. And then ambiguity, you know, things are not always as they seem. And, you know, and that also can give way to not coming up with the best solutions or not seeing all the multiple solutions to a problem. So, you know, I put this picture up there on the slide of I was on my way to Baghdad in a ground convoy, and I came around a corner and I came upon this scene. And I tell people an awful lot of wrong had to happen for this to happen. You know, folks not preparing the equipment the right way, not tying it down, not inspecting it, perhaps driving too fast. You know, in this case, there was no loss of life. There wasn't even any injuries. But there are so many times in life when we see the shift right in front of us, but we ignore it because it doesn't seem like the impact's that bad. Okay, nobody got hurt, nobody got injured. And so we don't stop to go, well, what did go wrong? And what could we do to prevent this in the future? And if I had just kept going on my way to Baghdad and not stopped, I always thought and asked myself, well, if I turn the corner next week on my way to Baghdad and I see the same thing, then shame on me as a leader, because maybe next week there would be a loss of life or there would be an injury, and you know, and I would never be able to forgive myself. And so I think we as leaders really have to be very aware of our environment and our surroundings and look for shift and ask ourselves, in the VUCA environment, why is that happening? But most importantly, how are we responding to that? And when I think about solar leaders as kind of being on the front lines of shift in the energy sector, and how solar has become, you know, really truly a game changer in the energy industry. And I think one of the reasons why is because they're very open to new ideas. And again, I think leaders who are the most effective are those who are open to new ways of thinking. And so, for instance, you know, solar, you know, is not just a concept for environmentalists or extremists. It's now being embraced and embraced strongly by conservative thinkers and traditional energy investors. And I think about my time again in Iraq. It's the most powerful examples that I have. But, you know, I showed up in 2005 in Iraq as the senior logistician on the battlefield to do the distribution of logistics for the 250,000 military men and women that were there. And I was quite prepared for that. But then when I got there, I found myself being a member of a new team, and I had new team players, and that's called the Iraqi Army. And I was given command and control of 3 Iraqi motorized rifle regiments. And they operate quite differently than us. As you can imagine, they don't speak the same language. They use completely different equipment. But it's very important that their military survives and their military is efficient and effective. And so I had to bring those people onto my team. And I had to listen hard. I had to listen hard to the way they do things and make sure that as I led them through change, that I built up their competence, and by doing so, that led to building up their confidence. And, you know, it takes kind of an imaginative, unconventional means to do that. I mean, first of all, they have no women in their military. And similar to our military, logisticians don't run their military, combat arms leaders do. But in the process of bringing them onto our team, they spent a great deal of time listening to our mission and capabilities, and we did the same with them, sharing everything from our value systems to our procedures. And so it was a process of educating them, training them, and developing them as a team. And again, I see a great parallel to that in the energy sector, because solar has, leaders in the solar industry have spent a lot of time really analyzing how they fit in, their mission, the capabilities of the other players in the energy sector, and what they've discovered is that, you know, they are a change agent. They are a team player. So always embracing a new way of business when you have new rules and new tactics and procedures, I think is very important for a leader. And I've really seen this in the corporate sector, especially as I've spent time in the financial industry, you know, with new regulatory requirements and compliance measures. And, you know, what I've discovered is probably not too unlike what many of the listeners have discovered, is that a lot of people are very reluctant to change. You know, it's never convenient. The only people that I find that really like change are the ones who created it. But what I have really noticed is that the leaders who realize that they need to embrace change, especially when it comes to regulatory and new procedures and things like that, and not drag their feet, but instead embrace it, they're the ones who will see the best growth, because they'll seize that initiative and they'll figure out ways to leverage the change to make it work for their business line. And that will end up in resulting in growth. And it takes a great deal of the right attitude to get that right response. I've always told my soldiers in the military that they're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And I also believe that every single soldier was a leader. Each of us have at least one person to lead, and that is ourselves. And so I always wanted to be a problem solver. And I think that leaders who understand that also will be very, very effective. And let's face it, energy leaders really get that they have to be problem solvers, because they're focused on reducing energy costs, optimizing their resources, and accelerating innovation, especially when it comes to technology. And I think within the energy sector, those who really want to be the premier leaders, they understand the integral role that solar is going to play, that solar does play, especially when it comes to that macro solution for addressing our nation's energy shortages. And, you know, and that's what leaders do. They do a great deal of assessment. They analyze the situation, and they assess what are the costs, what are the risks, you know, how do I meter the change so that we can keep up with it and not have it backfire. And I guess, you know, for leaders to really tap into that full potential, they have to realize that it takes that unconventional thought, you know, innovative, creative approaches. And at the same time, when you want to be creative and innovative, you can never lose sight of standards of excellence. You know, as logisticians, there's so many different ways that we could deliver supplies on a battlefield. But we had to make sure that with every operation, with every mission, that we never lost sight of standards. And it's not just standards in, like, quality and safety, but it's also standards in character and competence. And, you know, one of the examples I think about is, you know, one night in the middle of the night, I got a telephone call, and phone calls in the middle of the night are always tragic, and we had a significant accident with one of our convoys, and we lost one soldier, was killed. And in the assessment of that whole incident, what really bothered me the most was we were the enemy. The soldiers were driving too fast in the convoy. The vehicle overturned. 3 of the 4 soldiers walked away from the accident, walked away from that particular vehicle. 1 soldier was killed. And the soldier that was killed was the senior leader in the vehicle. And the reason why he was killed is because he didn't have a seatbelt on. And so when we talk about standards in any industry, it's so much more than just standards of quality of your work performance and all of that. It is also leading by example. And, you know, there isn't a company out there that doesn't have to pay attention to things like safety. But, you know, in a combat situation, when you as a commander are writing home and telling someone that they've lost their loved one, you know, you want the enemy to really be the enemy, not be within your own organization. And even more difficult for me at that point was the fact that it was a senior person and who just wasn't following the rules. So these sort of things are really, really important. And likewise, if you take the really large picture, you know, in terms of solving problems, you have to look at who are all the players. And as a logistician, I really understood that because we supported so many units. But we supported them with supplies that came from all over the world. So a perfect example is the movement of fuel throughout Iraq. We had such great risk at our borders, Turkey, Jordan, Kuwait. And those risks came in many different forms. Sometimes it was a security risk. Sometimes it was just congestion in the traffic. Sometimes it was third world country drivers and vehicles that broke down, drivers that weren't licensed. Sometimes it was paperwork, right? Not being able to get through the customs. But no matter what all those risks were in the big picture, we had to pay attention to all those little things because if the fuel did not go across the border and come into the country of Iraq to support all the units that were there, we would not accomplish our mission. And so it was a constant process of identifying risk, cost, and coming up with solutions, you know, the second and third order effects. I actually had an acronym that I called CRAM, C-R-R-M. What is our capability? What is the requirement we're trying to meet? And is there a shortfall? And if there's a shortfall, what's the risk? So capability, requirement, risk, and then the M is, how are we going to mitigate that? How are we going to mitigate that? I think that diversity is, it's almost gotten a bad name out there in the corporate sector because I think most people, when they hear the word diversity, they go, oh no, we're going to hear a class now on equal opportunity and men versus women. And, you know, I grew up in a military that was predominantly all male, so I understand change from the perspective of being introduced as a new player, you know, going to West Point in the second class of women and still being able to hear 200 years of perfectly good tradition crashing to the ground. And, you know, people not wanting you there, but the diversity is so much more than male versus female. Diversity really comes in to what is the experience and the knowledge on your team? And do you have a diverse team? Because the more diverse, the stronger you will be. And then how do you maximize that diversity? And because I think that to get to the best solutions, not just a solution, but the best solution requires not only teamwork, but diversity on that team. So I put this picture up there. It's a little bit blurry, but I like to show it to people. My mother, now she laughs. She says it looks like the little girl that ran to get in the picture with all the men. But I show that picture because just look, when you just first initially look at it, first of all, you see the different array of uniforms. On our commanding general, the top leadership team that we had in Iraq from 2005 to 2006, we had the Koreans, we had the Polish Army, we had the British Army, we had Marines, we had Air Force, we had Army, we had heavy and light, we had logisticians and combat arms, and of course, we had short and tall, and male and female. But it was very, very diverse. Now, on that team, I am the only logistician. The rest are all combat arms players. So the mission that we had in my unit was across the entire country of Iraq. Unlike only one other general in that picture was responsible for the whole country. Everybody else was given a sector. And it was very difficult to navigate across the entire country, and you kind of go across an invisible border within the country, and now you're in another general's area. And they do things a little bit differently, either because they're a different country or just because their leadership style is different. And so it took a great deal of energy and resources to reach out and connect with these different players to figure out the best way that we could support them and make the strongest team that we could in Iraq for that year. And I think in doing that, we created what we called the good to great mentality. We took it, of course, from Jim Collins' book, which I had as mandatory reading for all my colonels. And we did it from a perspective of that we do need to think differently and figure out how our strengths can be complemented and not replaced. And, you know, there's just no room for worrying about is someone going to be better than you. This was a collaborative effort. And I will note that there were many times that we did not agree as leaders, but I was always mindful of the fact that disagreement does not have to equal disrespect. And so this diverse team really, across the board, we improved operations to a level in Iraq during that year that actually changed doctrine for the Army and the way we did support. So when I tie that into energy sector and I think about how diverse the energy sector is and should be, solar complements that industry and increases the diversification, which means to me it increases the strength of that industry because there's a growing pool of knowledge, and there's difference here. Knowledge is not just data and information, it goes beyond that. And I think in the solar sector, there's a growing pool of knowledge, and that is combined with a growing population of experienced professionals who are dedicated to mining the sun and, as a result, strengthening the energy sector. So, I just close on this side by saying, because I mentioned about, just being a woman in the military and then a woman in combat. I had a boss once. We were sitting in Colombia with the Colombian Army in South America. He was a 4-star. I was a colonel. And a lot of the South American militaries at the time did not have women in their military. And he looked around the room and he told the people in the room that, you would be wise to follow our military as an example because our military is more professional because of women, not in spite of them. And, our nation could not have prosecuted the missions that we have over the last 13 years if women had not volunteered to be in so many different of the skill sets. And I really think about that in terms of solar. Solar, the energy sector is going to be better because of solar, not in spite of it. And that jumped out at me as I was preparing. I thought it was a pretty good parallel. Now, leaders, absolutely have to master the art and science of collegial dialogue and consensus building in order to build their strategy and their vision for their organization. And I think, so often people will put out a strategy or a vision for their company or for their organization, and if it comes solely from a single leader, then there's no ownership. There's no sense of I belong to this. And so I commanded many different times in the military, and every time I went into a new command, I would pull all the players together, the people on my team, the people that we supported, and I'd bring them together and say, let's talk about the mission of our unit, and what is our vision for this unit over the next 2 years, and how can we strategize that? And everybody had a voice, and to bring it together to create those things. And when you have ownership, the beauty of it is that directly ties into you're going to more positively affect the execution. And I think a lot of people think of the military as being very direct, that we just order people around and tell them what to do. And maybe in some units that's the case, or at some levels that happens because, time or the enemy has a play. But for the most part, the best units out there are those that are taking the time to figure out this strategy and vision piece by including the players into the picture. And I found that it led to not only greater progress and improvement, but certainly more effectively. Again, as a logistician and, in the corporate sector, supply chain management and all the rest of this, we are so bogged down with numbers. In Iraq, I received a battle update 2 hours every morning, a battle update 2 hours every evening. And I could not begin to express to you the amount of data that I would receive. And initially, my staff was just giving me data. They were not analyzing. They were not assessing. They were not forecasting. They were not connecting the dots. They were not looking at second and third order effects. They were depending on me to do that, I guess. I'm not sure. But I had to really put a halt to that early on and say, look, if at the point we discover that we just went from a green, which is a good status, to a black, which is a bad status, while you're briefing me, then, as one of my old bosses used to say, the horse is riding the cowboy. That is not the time. I mean, I need to be given these updates to make sure that through my experience, through my knowledge, and with all the other visibility that I have at higher levels, that if there's something I need to give to you to provide better guidance and get you going in a better direction, I am providing that. But as a staff, you must do this analysis and understand it. Because the better you look at a situation that way, you can better plan, rehearse, prepare, and execute your mission. So as we were kind of progressing through that year in Iraq, what I also discovered was at every phase of the operation, there are certain things that we had to really get down in the weeds on and change. You can't change everything, but I had what I called the win attitude, what's important now, and selected a few things that I knew that during our watch we needed to change. And so created what we called the LOO, L-O-O, lines of operation. And every organization has certain lines of operations, core competencies that they're paying attention to. And what I decided to do was have a meeting 1 hour a week where we address a very specific problem that we could affect. And then we would put it out to everybody, this is what we're going to work on, come prepared, 1 hour. And I would moderate that. I would facilitate that. So I did a lot of listening. Well, I decided that the very first one should be, we cannot afford to have drivers, soldiers out there driving vehicles empty. So you kind of get the picture. You move from one point to another point, you deliver your supplies, your fuel, whatever, but now you got an empty vehicle. So do you go back to the station that you were at with an empty vehicle, or do you figure out another way to maximize all those vehicles? And for me, it got down to this. How could I come to grips with writing a letter home to a spouse or to a parent and say, we lost your soldier today to the enemy, you know, and know that they were driving an empty vehicle? It would just, I just think that that was criminal. So the very first meeting that we held was to do just that, was to look at that problem. So everybody assembled that day. They came into the area where we did our plans and operations, and I looked around the table. Then everyone around the table was a colonel. So I told my operations officer, equivalent to the COO of a company, I said, okay, the meeting's over. And my operations officer said, but, you know, we haven't even started. I said, well, I know, but here's the problem. You don't have the right people at the table. And I looked around the table, and I looked at all the colonels, and I was like, how many of you colonels drive a truck? How many of you colonels are in the unit creating the plan, giving the safety briefing, looking at the enemy threat? None of you are. So what we have to do is we've got to put the right people around the table. And if the colonels want to sit on the outside, you know, the exterior of the room and listen, I'm fine with that. But I want the players who have to do the work day in and day out. And it was really interesting to see what happened next. So we postponed it a week. Everybody came in. Now I've got drivers. I have first sergeants. I've got warrant officers who do maintenance on the vehicles. I've got intelligence folks who are looking at, you know, the enemy on the battlefield. And it created an incredible collegial dialogue, which lent itself to building consensus on how we needed to change our operation to minimize empty vehicles being moved around the battlefield. But here's the exciting piece, is when those folks left that meeting, they owned it. They owned the situation. They owned not so much the problem, but they owned the solution. And by owning that, they wanted to go out and execute it the best they could. And even more importantly, because they felt good about being part of the solution, they began to then look at every phase of the operation, what else could they do to help the larger team? And, you know, that ties into just really leaders need to listen. And they need to listen, and they need to let people do their jobs. And then, you know, I mean, I was a decision maker. Now, I made the decision to change the way we did the work based on what they proposed. And it just set a whole new stage. And so we did the same thing with the people that we supported, the people that we worked with, the team that we were on. You know, I showed you that picture of all those other generals. There was oftentimes I had to go and sit with them one-on-one and explain to them how we were value added to their team. And by increasing their knowledge, it directly increased their appreciation and respect for what we brought to that team. So we became, you know, more value added as we demonstrated our expertise, you know, and thus we gained great credibility. You know, energy leaders can do the same thing by working together and seizing the initiatives and harnessing the potential to make solar a greater reality in the energy sector. So as I already mentioned, I mean, it does take a team. But as a leader, sometimes we don't have the tactical patience. We see a problem, we see an opportunity, and we want to jump on it really fast before maybe we let the right people at the right level do what they need to do. And so especially when we talk about a diverse team, that gives you a breadth of knowledge, you know, a breadth and width of knowledge that's just incredible. And I throw this picture, you know, into this part because I always tell everybody, I think that my Sergeant Major got it really right when they picked Master Sergeant Mason, my large brother there standing next to me, to be in charge of my physical security detachment. And what an incredible soldier, smart, confident. He knew his job. He knew how to maneuver a team of 13, a security detachment, whether we were flying in a helicopter or we were doing a ground convoy. And what I had to learn to do was to make sure I let him do his job. You know, and leaders need to know how to maximize that expertise on their team. And when, in some cases, do you actually follow and let other people lead? And the story I kind of like to share on that is, you know, oftentimes we were flying in helicopters all over the battlefield, and many times at night in blackout situations, so, you know, there's no lights or anything like that. And we always flew in at least a formation of 3. And I always flew in the back of the helicopter, and I was always given a headset because I was the senior person in the formation. And so I could listen to all the chatter between pilots and the ground. And, you know, sometimes I could have done without listening to some of it, but, you know, I got to listen to it. And I can remember one night we're flying along the Euphrates River, and I hear the ground folks, the tower, communicate up to the pilots. You need to get to the east side of the river. You're going to get shot out of the air. Those are pretty alarming words. And, you know, when you hear things like that, a second becomes a year. And so listening to that, and it did not seem that we were moving. It did not seem that the helicopters were moving at all. And at that point, you know, I'm the senior occupant, so I can, in fact, get on that headset, and I can say whatever I want to say. I have that right. And what I tell leaders is just because you have the right to say something or the right to do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. You know, being a leader takes a great deal of discipline. And at the end of the day, my expertise was not flying helicopters. For the pilots, that was their expertise. And, you know, in any organization, when the boss speaks, what happens? Most of the time, everybody stops and listens. And the last thing that we could afford to do would be that I would interrupt what they're doing to try to get all these helicopters ready and in the right position, you know, to maneuver across to the other side of the river. If I come over on the transmission and I begin to talk to the pilots, what have I just done? I've interrupted what they're doing, which maybe puts us at more risk. And so, you know, it takes a great deal of discipline to do that. And the other thing is, as a leader, is just realizing that, you know, that everybody that's on the team has a level of expertise that you might not have. You know, I would sit in that helicopter and I would look at the young soldier sitting right in front of me behind a machine gun. Now, I've fired machine guns, I've qualified on machine guns, but when we're in a helicopter, I'm not behind the machine gun. In fact, I'm sitting there, I have a 9mm pistol on my uniform. And anybody who knows anything about being in a helicopter, a 9mm pistol is not probably going to help us out too much. But you have to let Master Sergeant Masons of the world do their job and listen and sometimes follow. And I think it's a very important leadership point that sometimes we forget and we don't do well. And then by doing that and understanding the expertise that comes to the team, we really then begin to maximize our resources. We minimize our costs and we reduce our risk. And I think that makes us a very, very strong team. You know, and again, a very simple parallel is in the energy sector. I mean, that means adding value by combining, you know, solar and oil and gas. And, you know, because we'd be in a rule to hurt if it was just generals flying helicopters. So for me on the battlefield, learning these kind of lessons is really, really important. So, you know, we organize ourselves for success at every single point on the battlefield. And I really believe that businesses businesses can do the exact same thing. You know, and I always like to end on this definition of leadership to try to tie it all back in together. I was asked when I retired from the military what my definition of leadership was. And at that point, I didn't have one because the military is very good to us. The military gives us a definition for everything, whether we want it or not. And so, you know, I never really thought about it. Then I was asked to write an article on leadership, and I thought I probably should give this some thought. And I reflected back over all the years, and not just the military, but, you know, even leading when I was, you know, in high school playing sports and part of a team. But when I reflected on all those years, this is the definition that I came up with. And I think it's very important. You know, leadership is not about what's on the outside. Leadership is about what's on the inside. And leadership, oh, by the way, is a choice. Nobody can make you do it. You choose to do it. You choose to lead yourself. And then I got thinking, well, I get asked all the time, are you born a leader or, you know, do you become a leader? And, of course, I say that's both because we're all born to begin with. And we're born with some unique DNA, right? Every single one of us has our own DNA. If we have our own DNA, then we also have our own DNA leadership. So, for instance, you know, I was blessed to be born with a sense of humor, and I use a lot of humor in many of my talks. But if you've ever been around someone who doesn't have humor, it's like someone putting their fingernails down a chalkboard. It's just absolutely miserable. You know, so if you're not funny, you shouldn't use humor. If you can't sing, don't join the choir. And so I think there are some things that we're born with that are very much unique to us in our chemistry. But we're also given a mind, and in that way, you know, we can learn about leadership. I mean, how many of us have been in a situation where we go, oh my gosh, I sound just like my mother or my father or my teacher or my boss? And that's because we're learning leadership by watching others. So it became very obvious to me that leadership has to be the fusion of heart and mind. Another way to say that is the fusion of character and confidence. So character being those things that are inside your heart, you know, that emotional intelligence, and confidence being those things that we learn in our intellect. And, you know, we learn from experience, and we learn from going to school, and we learn from having different responsibilities. And I think a really important piece to this is that people forget that the fusion of heart and mind means you're going to struggle. And leaders don't like to struggle. Matter of fact, most leaders, when they struggle, they think they're weak. And I always encourage them that, no, you're not weak. When you're struggling, what I think is happening is you're struggling between your heart and mind, and that's good. Because when you have the struggle, you're struggling to come up with the best solution, the best decision, the best path to go. It's no different than raising your kids. When your child does something wrong, you go, your mind says you are grounded for life, but your heart says, oh man, this is my firstborn child. Struggle is good, it's not a weakness. And then leadership is not about the leader, it's about the led, it's about that team that you're leading. So when you lead, you should do it in selfless action. You should do it for what others need, for the betterment of others, for the better good of the whole team, and to effectively accomplish their mission. And again, I put effectively versus efficiently, and I think I started to say this, but I might have digressed earlier. As a logistician on the battlefield, listening to all that data twice a day, visiting all my units and seeing how they did their logistics, there was a tendency to look at efficiency. How can we do it better, faster, cheaper? But in reality, it's important to do it efficiently and effectively. And I only put effectively in there because most people remember efficiently and too many forget effectively. And I believe when you do things effectively, you bring in the human dimension, because it's people who get the job done, effectively accomplish the mission. And a mission sounds very military, but every organization has a mission statement, or if they don't, they certainly should. And everybody's life has a mission statement, a purpose. And then when I was putting this together, I thought, well, I could stop there because, you know, when you accomplish the mission, that ought to be good enough. That's success. And that is true. That is success. But what we ought to be about as leaders is we ought to want more than success. What we ought to want is to make a difference, is to be significant. Because there's an awful lot of people out there who we could put in the success box who do absolutely nothing for anybody else. And I just know as a leader myself, especially when I think about those that I've led, is that I want in this world to make a difference, that tomorrow's a better place than where we left it today. And I think that's really the excitement of leading in the energy industry, is how do we take these natural resources and make us better tomorrow because of what we're doing today and really make a difference. So I think that I'm getting close to 45 minutes. So Rick, I don't know if you've gotten any questions, but I'm happy to entertain some and at least wrap up the comments right there for now.
Yes, thank you very much, General Halstead. That was a great presentation. And if you wanted to advance to the last slide, I'll again chat to all participants and remind them how they can get a copy of your book.
There you go.
Now on Amazon. There. For those in the audience, please, if you have any questions, please send a chat. You can send it to all participants if you want to share your question with the entire audience, or you can send it to all panelists if you only want me to read it out. We have several, so I'll start at the top here. First one was from Matt. Can you name 3 characteristics that successful leaders develop?
That they develop? Well, I personally think the #1 characteristic that's so important is discipline. And I think that's something that you develop every single day. And so I've always put that characteristic as being the #1 most important, because if you're a disciplined person, all the others come together. But I'll tie that directly to the characteristic of integrity. I mean, you could say you either have it or you don't, which is true, but I think that when you're a very disciplined leader, then the thought of having integrity, not having integrity gets less and less. I mean, because what happens when you're disciplined, you begin to have a heart for being obedient. So it doesn't even enter the equation of taking the shortcut and doing anything to sacrifice your integrity. But I think discipline is one that, physical, mental, spiritual discipline is one that we have to work on every single day to get it right. And when we do things like integrity, which is the #1 characteristic, according to all surveys, that people want to see in their leaders, then, then integrity stays intact. And that's just hugely important in my mind. And then I really believe this characteristic of selfless service, because there is a tendency that the more successful you are, the more you have, and the higher you go, that there's a control piece to that, there's a powerful piece to that, and some people get too wrapped up in it. So it becomes, ironically, all about me, and in reality, I believe the higher you go, the characteristic got to be that it's more about those you lead, not less. And you have more capability to help those you lead the higher you go. That's the reason, that's the beauty of going higher, is that you have a greater influence and a greater impact, not more power and control. And I think we've kind of gotten that wrong when we discuss leadership. So they'd be the 3 that I would probably choose.
Great. Discipline, integrity, and selfless service. Excellent. The next question is from Chris. What has been the hardest decision you've ever had to make?
The hardest decision I've ever had to make? Well, maybe the first one was just joining the military. I had a game plan to go be a physical education teacher, and I thought I had my life all planned out till my mother told me about the military academy. So that was the hardest decision at that point. I always struggle with this question a little bit because, first of all, I don't think I've yet had the hardest one. It's probably ahead of me, and that's an important point because so many people think that they reach a point where they're no longer learning, and they're living on yesterday's success. And in reality, the hardest decisions that may be ahead of us. But probably the hardest decision I ever had to make would be certainly in Iraq. And and that was really trying to balance my time between, being available to people, commander of all the logistics, and yet at the same time, you've got wounded soldiers coming into the hospital, and really making the decision of when do you go to visit, when do you not, because so many people are depending on you. And I candidly, I'm not sure I got that right all the time, but I found those to be very difficult for me because, as a leader, when you have a lot of people that you're responsible for and are depending on you, again, you go back to that struggle of mind and heart, but, did I always make the best decision of being in the right place? But I struggled with that. I wanted to always be in the right place. I'm not sure I always did that. So I really wouldn't want to single it down to any one particular decision. I could probably give you an example of success and an example of failure in both. Matter of fact, those are in the book, especially the example of failure. One of the things I knew was very important in the book was, you can't write a book and tell everybody, like, if you do this, your life will be perfect, and this is all the right way to do it. I made sure I put a few things in there about the wrong way to do it because, if some of the bumps in the road that I've had can help other people, then let's use those stories to help them.
And a follow-up question from Chris about your decision to join the military. His son wants to go into ROTC. Is that a good decision or not?
Well, if his son wants to do that, then it's a good decision for his son. What I get asked this all the time, my son or daughter wants to go in the military, should they? If they want to, let them follow their heart. Let them follow their heart and try it out. I discourage parents from, being holding them back because of maybe their own fear or whatever. Because, we have to live out our own lives. I use this comparison a little bit with my own family. When I found out I was going to Iraq as a commanding general, I reminded my parents that my entire career they had been supportive of my decisions to serve in the military. And for the most part, they'd only ever seen kind of the good side of it, the promotions and the change of command. Now going to combat was a totally different thing, and I could just kind of see in my dad's eyes that he would prefer I'm not going to do that. And I just said, you have to continue to honor and respect. This is what you raised me to be, and keep honoring and respecting my decisions. But I think, that it's good to encourage your son or your daughter, in this case your son, and make sure they understand exactly what they're getting into. I think researching it is very important. Make sure they have as much knowledge beforehand because sometimes we do make decisions based on emotion. When I wanted to be a gym teacher, instead of going to the military academy initially, it was because I wanted to be in the gym. I wanted to play sports. I wanted to have fun. But as I learned more and more about the military academy and what it involved, and it struck to that discipline and duty on our country, my mom was right, and she pushed me in the right direction. So I'd say support and encourage him, but make sure he knows what he's getting into. He can email me if he likes.
Oh, thank you, and I'll post the email later on. The next question from Nancy. How do you reward innovation or the spirit innovation when the effort actually might miss its mark? Or should you reward that in that case?
Yeah, that's a little more difficult. I had this often in that meeting that I referred to as the loop, the lines of operation. And oftentimes it'd be a young soldier, soldier who thought they had a great idea, and you could just see a colonel sitting behind them wanting to jump on them with like, are you crazy? And I, as a moderator in those meetings, I would say, no, let the soldiers speak, let them have their place. I think number one, we need to have the courage to make sure the person understands why that innovation might not work for this. I would say give credit where credit's due. Appreciate the fact that they're trying to think outside the box or not even include a box, and they're trying to be innovative, but also have the courage to say, but it doesn't quite fit, and here's why. Because, it's good to make them feel good about it, but if they make them feel too good, they don't even realize they're not on the right path. So I've always believed in not killing their spirit. In the book I write about it, it's very important for leaders to be demanding, but not demeaning. So I've been in meetings where I've heard someone in the spirit of innovation think they have a great idea and not have one, and then be totally embarrassed by the people around them. And do you think you're ever going to get another comment or thought from that person again? No, you're not, because they're not going to say anything again, which is a real shame because there might have been potential on another day for another problem. So I think it's very important to let them know it doesn't fit this time, that you appreciate their input, to keep that spirit alive, because none of us get it all right all the time.
Great. The next question, in what areas are you growing the most at this time of your life?
Doing webinars. You know, I am learning so much from the civilian sector. I get a lot of energy from the different corporations that I speak with. I don't know that, I guess what I'm learning is that the principles that I have been very blessed to live my life by are pretty darn valid. And I better keep practicing them myself. You know, there's a tendency to put it out there, right, and then not practice the discipline yourself. And so I'm learning that, you know, I better make sure that I keep leading by example in everything that I do, and that it's so important to keep sharing with other people. It can wear you out, you know, it can tire you out a little bit. So many people want a piece of you, and but I actually get energy from that and go, you know what? Isn't it awesome that I have the opportunity to share? But I better learn to make sure I keep my personal battle rhythm and that, you know, I lead by example. So, you know, we have a saying in the military: improve your foxhole every day. You know, and the day you stop learning is the day you stop living. And so there's lots of little things I learn every day, but most of it's reinforcement that I got to keep doing what I'm doing, and I got to live it, continue to live it.
Great. I'm going to make a note of that. Improve your foxhole every day.
Every day.
To live by. Next question from Matt. Diversity can also present challenges that can end up being divisive to a group of people. How is that best managed? Yeah,
well, first of all, diversity is far more challenging to lead in a diverse environment. I mean, it's a lot easier, you know, and I've had this argument many times with the infantry, right? So if your whole team looks like you, acts like you, has the same skill set as you, it's a lot easier to lead that team. It is much harder to lead a team that's diverse, that comes at a problem from 360 degrees. It just is. It's harder. But, you know, leadership, if leadership were easy, everybody would be doing it. You know, if you want to get to the best answers, you want it to be, you know, you want it to be challenging. You know, iron sharpens iron. That's how you get to the best. And so, but, you know, the best leaders are those who understand that they have to deal with conflict. And when you have a diverse team, you're going to have some conflict. Remember I said it goes back to disagreement does not have to equal disrespect. So the leader creates that environment. And so, you know, if you have a very diverse team and you got someone who's really outspoken or, you know, overbearing, and the leader allows that, well, you know, then they're creating an environment that's going to be very difficult to operate in. So I think the leader sets the stage for that diversity can be and should be our strength, and they have to be a pretty darn good moderator at the same time. But yeah, I forget who said the name was that asked that, but or made the comment. But yeah, diversity is a lot harder, a lot harder. When they started putting women on the brigade combat teams, my buddies who were infantry their whole life, you know, 20, 25 years, only led infantry, only had men, you know, they didn't have to worry about all the different complexities that I had on my team. You know, they're my friends. They call me up and go, Becky, what do I do? And I mean, the panic in their voice was almost comical for me because I had been dealing with diversity and complexity for a long time. And I said, first of all, deep breath. This is a good thing. This is a good thing, and you don't lead a woman any different than you lead a man, so we'll start with that. You don't lead a logistician any differently than you lead a combat armed person. What you do is you sit back and you go, what's the value added that they brought to my team? How much more can we do? How much more effective can we be because of now the depth that we have on our team?
Excellent advice. Next question from Ken. What do you want your life to say to others?
Well, I have a presentation that I do that's called No Regrets. And I tell people that when I die, on my tombstone, I would just like 2 words, the words no regrets. Now, it's somewhat rhetorical because there isn't anybody that has no regrets. But here's my point, is that I would like people to know that I lived and led my life in a way that I tried to really minimize the regrets in my life. So if you look at that tombstone and you see those 2 words, no regrets, you know, you step back and go, gee, I wonder if that person was a man or a woman. And I would be like coming back saying, it doesn't matter. I wonder if they were young or old. It doesn't matter. What matters is how they led their life, how they lived their life. And so I think really I would just like to be remembered for, you know, that I led and lived my life, minimizing my regrets and helping other people do the same. And by doing that, you know, just making a difference.
Next question from Thomas. What led to your decision to retire?
In 2004, I was diagnosed with chronic fibromyalgia and had become very ill. And then I deployed to Iraq from 2005 to 2006. And when I came back, I thought maybe I would be able to, you know, get the right medical care and help and kind of work through it. The military put me on 15 different prescriptions to kind of keep me going, and really no progress in getting that disease under control. So I decided to put my retirement in just prior to my 2-star board, and I was only 49 years old, and I knew that I wanted to live to be 100, and I could not do it with this disease and not knowing how to take care of it. So I put my retirement in, I retired, and I spent the next year working with a chiropractor and changed really so many things in my life. Changed my nutrition, I got adjustments, kind of restoring functionality to my body, and I went from 15 prescription drugs to 0. It's kind of the short story of it over a period of years, and really changed. I take whole food nutrition supplements, but I got to tell you, I could not do that in the military. Our healthcare system is not designed to do that. We're getting better at it. I spend a lot of time now working with the military to try to show what a difference it could be, because I am the healthiest I've been in probably 15 years. But that's why I retired, because I felt my soldiers deserved the best leader, and I couldn't be the best anymore. I was just too ill. But I have to tell you, I cried like a baby the day I retired, because I loved the military, I loved my soldiers. But you know what? That was called the shift, and what I was responsible for was the response. And so I got help, and now I'm responding by trying to help other people in the military.
Well, excellent. And the comment from Tom was that was a very selfless decision, and it's similar to what his wife has done.
Oh, wow. Well, I wish her the best. I mean, again, it goes back to selfless action, right? I mean, the military is not that big. I knew every single general that was ready, willing, and able to take on a 2nd star. And if I had been the one that got selected, and then I'm not able to perform my duties, and I am forced to leave, what does that say to my battle buddies? You know, I was thinking about me so that I could get a 2nd star over them. I think it's better to think about the folks that deserve our leadership, and they deserve the best out of us every single day. And when we can't deliver that, we have to figure out how we respond to it. So I appreciate his comment back.
And General Halstead, do we have time for a couple of more questions? We've reached our hour, but I did have 2 other questions that came in.
I'm fine with it. I'm okay.
Okay, great. The next question was related to your story on the reduction of medication. Any chance that the military will be considering changes in nutrition, foods, and its healthcare system?
Well, they are already, especially on the VA side. There's been some new senior leadership positions in the last couple of years that have been put into place. Chiropractic is in about 30% of the different locations, and anybody that knows about chiropractic, they certainly are They don't choose medication first. You know, the body is designed to heal itself, so we're getting more chiropractors. We're getting much more holistic acupuncture, massage therapy. I can only speak to the Army. You know, the Army, 54% of the military and the Army is on a prescription, and, you know, we've had a very hard 13 years, and we have to get away from that. For a variety of reasons, they're on this, because they've been wounded or PTS, but the military is going in the right direction is the short answer. Is it going fast enough? Not in my opinion, but it's a very large machine, and it takes time to change it. But both the VA and the active duty side, I think, are trying very hard to make the appropriate changes. But we need to help out with that. We need to appeal to those we elect in government to do the right things for our military, and we need to just be out there supporting them in that regard. But it's a long, hard process, but we're going in the right direction.
Well, that's encouraging. Next question from Laura. Is there such a thing as a born leader?
Yeah, in my early discussion about heart and mind, I don't think so myself. I mean, I said, yes, everybody's born, okay, we're all, and we have our own unique DNA, but I think if we went under this concept that, well, the only way to be a leader is you have to be a born leader, would be so discouraging. You know, I mean, and I think that people who believe that, and I know Laura doesn't, but people who do believe that are usually the ones who aren't very good leaders. And so it's a cop-out. Well, I wasn't a born leader. That's just not my thing. You know, so it's a cop-out. And that's why when I wrote this book and when I do my speaking, you know, I really put the emphasis on the fact that every single person listening, every person sitting in the room, to include the waiters, the waitresses, security, whoever's listening, every single one of you has at least one person to lead, and that's yourself. And you do it with your heart and your mind. And so, you know, there are some characteristics that you're born with, but there are many that you learn, many that you learn. And I think that's what makes leadership so fascinating, is the fact that we have the ability to learn. You know, when I was growing up in the military, I always looked at 2 jobs out and 1 rank up. So if I was a captain, I was watching every major out there. Oh, that was a smart thing to do. Oh, that was dumb. I'm not going to do that when I become a major. You know, I'd watch them. And, you know, and even my top 5 most important values as a leader changed over time, because my leadership changed over time. Because why? Because you can learn. And you can learn both from the good and from the bad. And I address that in my book as well. I mean, I had a few toxic leaders that I had to work for. And I learned what I did not want to be like when I grew up from them. But I didn't get to choose them. I still had to work for them. I still had to operate within their command. But I learned a lot from them, and it helped me learn and identify toxic leaders in my own organization and how to deal with them. So yeah, I think it's much more than that.
Great. And I have one more question that came in. Several of the examples that you provided around system failure, things like the soldier that died who was not wearing a seatbelt, they seem like tragedies that could be prevented with more checklists and audits and process procedures. But how do you balance that desire to prevent any mistakes from the need to be organizationally light so that you don't stifle innovation?
Yeah, exactly. Well, look, you can have a checklist for breathing. We have lots of checklists, and we practice, and we rehearse, and we plan, and we prepare. But do you remember earlier in the conversation I said leadership is a choice? Leadership is a choice. And when that sergeant chose not to put on his seatbelt, he had a checklist. He held the checklist. He was the one who was responsible to make sure that everybody else had their seatbelt on, right? So there's a checklist if you choose to follow it. So what we have is sometimes we have organizations that are very risk averse, and they want to dot every I and cross every T, and so they burden organizations with an incredible amount of paperwork, when in reality what they should be doing is, some of those checklists are very important because you can't remember everything, but you got to balance that with teaching, training, and instilling in the person that they better lead themselves to follow these things. And look, because it's a choice, some people are not going to choose wisely. And when they don't, you know, well, the absolute worst cost is life, which we, you know, totally get in the military, but, you know, it's no different in the civilian sector, you know. There's a lot of equipment that people operate in factories and all kinds of occupations. And, you know, look at policemen driving vehicles faster in the chase than they should be. And, I mean, there's just all kinds of examples. But you can't have a checklist for everything. So what we have to spend time doing what we're doing today, which is leader development, to get people to realize that it starts with them, making the right choices. If I make the right choices, I can probably eliminate a lot of lists.
Very well said. Okay, well, we've run out of our questions, and we're way past the hour, so I thank you very much for your time, General Halstead. I'm going to, again, post the link to your book to the entire audience, so I'd encourage people that want to hear more stories like this. They can purchase your book on Amazon, and I also posted the link where they can send you a message to your email account, so you'll have that as well. Do you have any parting remarks before I close up?
Well, I did see where someone asked a question, just real quick, that could someone in the solar, someone in the solar industry be like the leader for the energy industry? Can a leader in solar effectively lead the entire energy industry? And my answer to that is absolutely yes. You know, my dad taught me a long time ago, you don't have to be an engineer to lead engineers. And I think this is one of the things that the military is discovering is you don't have to be a male combat arms person to lead the larger unit. What you have to be is you have to have character and competence to lead the larger unit. You don't have to be male versus female. You have to be infantry versus, you know, a logistician. I feel the exact same thing applies in the energy sector, you know. So sure, there certainly could be a leader in the solar industry that could effectively lead the whole industry. I just saw that, and I thought that was a great question.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for bringing that up. They must have sent it privately to you.
Okay, I don't know how I got it, but it's on the screen. Thanks a lot, Rick. I appreciate everybody listening, and I enjoyed being with you today.
Okay, thank you. Our pleasure. And thank you to General Halstead, both for your service to the country, also your service to Principal Solar. This is also her second webinar, and we'll hope to have her back every year going forward as the solar industry